Exactly 1 year ago today, the United States greenlit an operation supported by the Ukrainians to conduct an offensive operation. It is something that had been 6 to 9 months in preparation. It included billions and billions of dollars, hundreds of armored vehicles, millions of rounds of various types of ammunition, intelligence support, training support. We went all in, and we were hopeful. Many Western commentators especially were hopeful that the Ukrainians would penetrate through the Russian defensive belts, the five belts of the so-called Surovikin line, go all the way to the Azov coast, cut off the land bridge, and basically put the Russians in an untenable position from which later on, maybe in 2024, they could win. We all know that that was an abysmal failure. But we already knew that because as I wrote, and several other people who were willing to look at the truth wrote in the months before that operation, that it was a complete disaster based on military fundamentals, based on an honest analysis of the two sides. There was no chance that that was going to succeed. And I called it well ahead of time exactly what would happen, or very close to it. And that's the way it turned out. And again, let me reiterate, it's not because I'm some sort of brilliant analysis. It's because I'm just willing to look at the reality on the ground, and I have the experience that's necessary to make these kinds of calls. Now, here we are, 1 year later, we're on the cusp of making another possibly monumental error. We now are wanting to support what Volodymyr Zelensky has been asking for many, many months, which is the permission to use Western weapons to strike directly on targets in Russia. And this has unleashed a whole new problem, a set of problems that we're only now beginning to see how it's going to play out. But now then, it's gone from theoretical to operational, as last week the President Biden greenlit and gave the authorization to the Ukraine side to use weapons, American weapons, on Russian soil. And now then, yesterday, we're getting some video just today, Gary's showing that to you right now. Now then, those things have started landing. There was a HIMARS strike on Belgorod, which is a Russian city, southern Russian city that's north of Kharkiv area right now. And now then the question is going to be, where else are they going to fire? And of course, the bigger question is, what is Russia going to do about this? Now, Blinken, Secretary of State Blinken, was talking a couple of days ago at a NATO event, where he's talking about what else we may do and just really what the nature of this whole move by the United States is.
The stakes couldn't be higher in this moment. We know that if Russia's aggression is allowed to proceed in Ukraine with impunity, it will not stop with Ukraine. Over the past few weeks, Ukraine came to us and asked for the authorization to use weapons that we're providing to defend against this aggression, including against Russian forces that are massing on the Russian side of the border and then attacking into Ukraine. That went right to the president. And as you've heard, he's approved the use of our weapons for that purpose. Going forward, we'll continue to do what we've been doing, which is, as necessary, adapt and adjust.
Okay, some big problems with that are not self-evident when you hear his comments there. First of all, his opening premise is dead wrong. He said, we know that if we don't stop Russia and Ukraine, they're going to continue to going on. No, they're not. They are not going to go. It doesn't matter even if Putin had some fantasies about regenerating the Soviet Union. It doesn't make any difference what he wants. He's not going to be able to, because he doesn't have the physical capacity. He's saying that over and over, and yet it's like the realities. I guess that Blinken and Biden and all these other folks are counting on people not to know. But I do know. And now then you're going to know, because Putin, number one, it's not even, he doesn't have this threat to, or this fantasy to go to recreate the Soviet Union. He's never said that. He's accused of it all the time, but that's more misinformation by Western folks who want to just paint Putin as in modern day Hitler. That's the whole purpose of that. They say, yeah, he wants to roll over all the Western Europe, and oh my God, we have to stop him. You see that. They keep saying that over and over, but there's not true. To the contrary, what Putin is saying is that he wants a negotiated settlement to end the war, not to go on further, not to even take all of Ukraine, much less plunging a conventional force into a 32-member military alliance that is equipped with nuclear weapons and a much larger Air Force, Navy, and Army than he's got. He's not stupid. You can say he's evil if you want to. If that makes you feel better, sure, go ahead and do it. But he's not stupid. And nor is he going to be able to do magic. So he can't just like say, I'm going to take the force structure I have, make it triple the size, and then I'm going to go in and do something because I want it to, because you can't do that. He doesn't have it. So that's the first point here is the premise that if we don't stop Putin, they're going to go all in. The second part just doesn't even make sense because he's talking about how we're just going to continue to evolve and be flexible and change as the conditions warrant. But here's the problem with that. What's your plan? Adapt to what? What objective are you seeking that you're going to adjust off of? Because that actually, I mean, the concept is fine. I mean, you're supposed to do that. You don't stay rigidly on a plan and then in a dynamic situation where there's an enemy force at play and you try and, you can't move and you don't adjust. That would be stupid and it would be foolish. But you have to have a plan first, because if you don't have a plan and an objective, then what are you going to flex to? What are you going to flex off of? What are you going to try to accomplish with this? And in fact, on that point, Mr. Blinken, what is it that this is supposed to accomplish by sending forces or weapons, allowing them to strike deeper into Russia? First of all, it's important to note that this is not something new. Giving this permission is not going to finally allow Russia to be struck on their side of the border, because that's been going on for months, for well over a year, probably closer to 2 years, where the Ukraine side with their assets have been striking targets deep inside of Russia. It happened barely 2 weeks ago, less than 2 weeks ago. And in fact, we're going to have MIT professor Ted Postel on Friday, who's going to give us a detailed analysis of what happened on one of the more recent strikes by the Ukrainian side deep into Russia, over 1,000 miles into Russia for that matter, on their early warning radar system. So there's nothing new on this. Ukraine has been using its drones. I mean, it was all in the news for months earlier this year, to where the Ukraine side was attacking Russian oil refineries, oil depots, certainly into Crimea, but even into Russia proper. So that's not new. So then you have to ask Secretary Blinken, since they've already been doing this with their own weapons, how is adding American weapons going to cause anything positive for our side or even the Ukraine side? See, they don't want to talk about that when they're having these kinds of statements like the ones I just showed you here. What you don't hear him saying is, well, of course, Ukraine has been doing this and it hasn't really had any impact on the tactical battlefield, but maybe this one will. They don't even say that. They just say, well, we're going to flex, without ever offering even a plausible explanation for how it's supposed to help. And I think the reason they don't, folks, is because they don't know. The answer is that they don't. It's not going to change. None of those other ones have changed. I mean, they were hitting oil refineries and a bunch of stuff that was painful for the Russian side, but you saw it had no impact on the tactical battle. None whatsoever. They're continuing to move forward because, folks, that's how war works. You expect to get hit some. Nobody has a plan, at least no rational plan, that you don't expect the enemy to cause some amount of attrition to you, to your logistics, to interdicting things as they're going forward, to killing people in the rear. I mean, every major war has been that way. So that's expected and normal, and Russia's handling it, but it's very small scale. The Russian strikes, according to Zelensky, I saw about a week or so ago, over 9,000 missiles and rockets have been fired by the Russian side in this war, and they're literally in the scores and sometimes hundreds per month for at least 18 months, 18 consecutive months. This has been going on, and they are saturating strikes throughout the country of Ukraine, all the way to the western border, north to south, east to west, everywhere in between. And you see, it still has not caused Ukraine to have to get knocked out of the war. It has caused some problems, and it's, especially in the area of energy generation, a lot of problems, and it's serious. But you see, it hasn't caused a collapse of the front. Now, if 9,000 missiles on top of the drones, that's separate, over 18 months has still not knocked the Ukraine side out, what do you think a literal handful of missiles is going to do to the Russian side about the war? Folks, I'm just telling you, and I want to reinforce this. It has no tactical value. It will not help the Ukraine side. It will not make America safer. It will not stop an alleged and presumed future operation by Russia. It won't even have an impact on it. Okay, what will it do, though? And therein is the problem. Because we have what the Russians are saying is that they're not prepared to just lay down and let you do whatever you want to do. We had the Deputy Foreign Minister Ryabkov a couple of days ago made a statement, I believe it was Monday, that he said if you continue to do this, if you continue to strike in Russia with American weapons, and that's the distinction here. Gary, if you can throw that headline up there from Ryabkov, he said that they warn against a fatal miscalculation in Ukraine. Now, listen, folks, nobody wants to hear that. We don't want to hear that Russia might do something against it. We want to be able to do whatever we want with Russia, and then there not to be any consequences. There not to be any pushback. That's just not how war works. That's not how reality works when the other side has agency. They can do what they want. They don't play with our nonsensical statements and our trying to wordsmith things to make it sound something that it's not. They have physical agency. And they are saying that they distinguish between American/Western or NATO weapons striking their territory and the Ukraine side. They're at war with Ukraine. So that happens. And when Ukraine strikes, they strike back on targets in Ukraine. They've done that throughout the war. But if another country uses their weapons, and especially if some of it and some of these advanced weapons have to be this way, if foreign soldiers are also aiming those weapons and guiding them onto targets in Ukraine, in Russia, that is a new situation. That changes the dynamics. And they're warning us that they're willing to take action outside of Ukraine against our own assets. But that doesn't seem to bother Jens Stoltenberg, the leader of NATO, because he's saying that, you know what, we should do even more of it.
This is a war of aggression conducted by Russia, and of course Ukraine has the right to defend themselves, and that includes also hitting legitimate military targets inside Russia.
So again, the words sound plausible, but yes, I mean, if Ukraine has been attacked, they have the right of self-defense. They can go and attack Russia. As I pointed out, that's what has been happening. They are shooting back. They are defending themselves. They are using their weapons inside of Russia. They've been doing it for a long time. So that has not escalated the war. But now then, these weapons that they're talking about, like the possibly the Taurus missile system, the Scalp, some of the ATACMS, long-range American weapons, HIMARS, several of these others. Folks, you need to understand something about those weapons. It's not like we just hand them over to Ukraine and the Ukraine goes, cool, thanks, man. And then they put their troops on them, they go up and they fire them into Russia. It doesn't work like that. A lot of these things are very sophisticated weaponry. They require very sophisticated operations, and very often they require terrestrial systems to be able to guide them onto the terminal location in Russia, which means that it has to be operated in part by American, French, German, British, etc. That's the issue here. That's what Russia is saying is a different for them. And they're saying, hey, you guys are really advocating striking our territory with NATO people. You need to understand something. We're not going to let that fly. Vladimir Putin himself reinforced this just days ago.
Представители стран НАТО, особенно в Европе, особенно в малых странах, они должны вообще отдавать себе отчет, с чем они играют. Они должны помнить о том, что это, как правило, государство с небольшой территорией, с очень плотным населением. И этот фактор, который они должны иметь в виду, прежде чем говорить о нанесении ударов вглубь российской территории.
In the rest of that interview, or elsewhere in that same interview, he specifically said, we have nuclear weapons. And then when he's talking about you have a small, densely populated country, he was talking about some of the Baltics who were really advocating this and cheerleading it on. He's saying, you realize y'all are right next to us, and we have weapons that can reach out and touch you. And look, a lot of people want to say, oh, they don't mean that. They would never do that because they didn't, any of the other red lines we've crossed, they never did anything on that before. Folks, this is a different situation. This is not before. This is not what has happened in the past. And we don't know for sure where Russia's red lines are, where his real red lines are. But to assume because none of these others, like with tanks or artillery pieces, air defense systems, or F-16s, because none of those were crossed the red lines, then suddenly that we believe that Russia will never believe that there's a red line. He'll never do anything. So literally, we can do anything we like, and there will never be any consequences. That could be a fatal, fatal mistake. And in fact, we're seeing it's already advancing into other areas. Aside from using the weapons, somehow that's not enough either. So Macron, who just seems to be itching to get into a fight with Russia, he's been talking about, we've shown here for months now, where he's been saying, maybe we'll send troops, maybe we won't. It's hypothetical, but he never lets it go. He seems to keep coming back. Now that he's saying, and it could be announced as early as tomorrow, that French trainers and advisors are being sent to Ukraine. Apparently, some are on the ground right now. Lots of reports to that effect. Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister of Russia, had this to say.
As for the French instructors, I have reason to believe there are many specific facts on this matter, that they are already working in Ukraine. Regardless of whether they are members of the French armed forces or simply mercenaries, they represent an absolutely legitimate target for our armed forces.
Just think about this for a second. First of all, just from the French perspective, what the hell, man? What are you thinking? Why do you want to send your soldiers who signed up and volunteered to serve the French flag and to defend French interests and to defend the French people, send them into harm's way to where another country has said, we will consider them specifically as an enemy combatants if they fight against us and they support the force in the war zone, and that they could get killed. And what benefit to France would that be? What benefit to Ukraine would it be? I'm telling you, from a military perspective, take the emotion out of it. Take the whoever side you're on out of it. Just look at the fundamentals, the realities on the ground. French forces aren't going to do anything. If you sent the whole French army in there, there's not that many of them, they wouldn't change the dynamics either. Even if they actively fought against Russia, they would simply die. Because the same problems that afflict the Ukrainian army in that frontline duty there, and where the way this fight is going on, they would die in the same numbers. In fact, they might even die in higher numbers because the French right now are not trained on high-intensity warfare. In many regards, the Ukrainian army is as bad as they are in some areas because so many have been killed. A lot of them have more experience than anybody in the West, to include America. So they're not going to change the dynamics, but he's putting them into a place where not only could they get killed, but then it could also spawn, because if French/NATO troops are killed by Russians in Ukraine, it's not going to be very much farther before somebody's going to be saying, hey, what about Article 5? Now, let me just try to cut that off right now and just kill that in the crib, folks. There won't be any Article 5 planning in that. That's not what Article 5 is. For those who don't know, Article 5 is that an attack on one NATO member is an attack on all, is to be considered as such. And then the collective response, attack. Not if a NATO country goes against and chooses to fight another foe and they get killed in the process. That's not an attack, ergo, no Article 5. So if France is thinking that, if Ukraine is thinking that, they're going to be badly disappointed. Because unless we have a suicide desire and we want to get into a war that could go nuclear right away, we're not going to do that. Even as dumb as some of our leaders are in some of this stuff and the risk that they're taking, Biden has shown that he doesn't want to go that far. It seems like he wants to get up to the edge of it, but he doesn't want to go over the edge. And I can't imagine him actually choosing to go to war with Russia when an Article 5 is not valid at that point. That does not, however, stop Volodymyr Zelensky, because, of course, he wants us to draw in. That's the reason why I believe they struck those early warning radar systems deep inside of Russia that had nothing to do with the tactical fight. He wants to spawn an overreaction so that people will come in on his help. That's why he wants to attack not just in Russia with his own stuff, which he has done to no effect. That's why he wants your weapons with your name on it, so that it'll strike, that possibly that will draw America into the war, NATO into the war. Understand what's going on here, folks. This is about Zelensky wanting to draw you into his war so that he can fight it. He could care less if it potentially goes to nuclear against your country. That's not his concern. His concern, and pardon me, understands this, he's doing anything it takes to get whatever help he can for his country. And while I can respect somebody wanting that for their country, I do not respect in any way, shape, or form anyone from any country trying to draw my country, my fellow soldiers, and your fellow countrymen into a conflict we should never fight. But that's not going to stop Zelensky from trying, as he says here.
I said that I think that using any weapon, Western kind of weapon, on the territory of Russia, it's the question of time.
Just a question of time, he said. Whatever, all these weapons, he's imagining that all of them, it's just a matter of time, whether that's the ATACMS, apparently the HIMARS has already been used, is that footage that Gary showed you at the beginning. There was some missile parts that were found after some of the missiles were shot down. So that's already been used. ATACMS has a much longer range, can go deeper in there. Some of these other cruise missiles can go further. He thinks it's just a matter of time. And it's hard to argue with his logic because that's certainly been the case for nearly everything else that he's asked from the beginning of this war. Whatever he's been pleading for eventually comes, whether that was American tanks, British tanks, air defense systems, artillery systems, middle range rocket systems, now long range rocket systems, F-16s, everything eventually came. So I understand why he would say that. We just need to really hope that that's not the case this time. But there are some in America related to us in any way, associated with the United States. I keep using him a lot because he keeps providing just nonsensical stuff and people keep putting him on in the mainstream media. That's former Lieutenant General Ben Hodges, who seems to be absolutely in Zelensky's corner.
First of all, this is good news, obviously, that there has been a lessening of restrictions, but I think it's terrible policy still. That was a terrible policy to begin with. And the fact that there is or was this restriction is a reflection of the inability or the unwillingness of the administration to say that they want Ukraine to actually win. And the same is true for Germany. If the strategic objective was that Ukraine defeats Russia, which is what I think it should be, then the administration would say, everything you have, use as you see fit, as long as it is in compliance with international law.
You see that he's literally the cheerleader for Zelensky. That's exactly what Zelensky just said. He said it's all a matter of time. And you hear Hodges saying, yeah, I think we should give them everything. Throw the kitchen sink in there. We shouldn't hold anything back. And you see he said his objective that he argues is the defeat of Russia. Okay, let's examine that. Let's take a look at that. Defeat Russia. So you're saying that even though the tide of war from I don't know, probably August of last year, July really of last year, it's all been going against Ukraine. It's continuing to do so. It's going through fits and starts. Sometimes it makes big progress, but always making methodical progress. And certainly it is continuing to this day. So you would somehow have to, on the tactical battlefield, reverse that. And you're going to have to then start to push Russia out and literally unseat them, which you failed utterly to do last year. But somehow, okay, let's say that all these weapons that truly Biden, Macron, Schultz, et al., all these guys finally say, yeah, you know what, we're going to throw caution to wind. We're going to give everything that we have, no holes barred. You're going to have it all and see if maybe you can start pushing them back. Now, of course, I've told you that physically that even that wouldn't actually succeed because Ukraine doesn't have the manpower. So unless you want to add NATO troops into it in the hundreds of thousands, because that's what it would take, then even that's not going to work. That's the reality. But let's look at it at the theoretical. Let's say that somehow all this stuff worked out and Hodges got his way and that Russia was started to be defeated. That's going to result in a defeat for everybody. And I'm talking about us primarily. This is the perverse thing that none of these people can seem to get through their heads, that there is no path to victory. There is no tactical path in reality for the Ukraine to overcome what they've already lost and for the Russian side to lose. The only way you could do that is to put enough foreign manpower in that and all the weapons that could change the dynamics on the battlefield, and then you have the Russian doctrine kicking in. Long before any threat of that is going to happen, that the Ukraine side would start to unseat the Russians from these 5 lines of defenses, you're going to get nuclear weapons. And listen, that you don't hear this much either, but even on the mainstream media, on CNN, a couple of months back, I think it was in March, Jim Sciutto, their foreign press secretary, not secretary, their foreign affairs correspondent, had conducted a lot of research and had written a book and published it, revealing that in the late summer, early autumn of 2022, apparently Russia was this close to using tactical nuclear weapons. And why was that? Because at the time, they were being driven out of Kherson City in the southern part of the zone, and they had just lost a huge swath of land in the northern part in the Kharkiv area. And apparently Russia was on the cusp of actually launching tactical nuclear weapons. And the U.S. was so worried about it that they actually sent a delegation to talk to Russians. They talked to the Chinese and several other countries as well, pleading not to go to nuclear weapons. Russia then stabilized the situation in the latter part of 2022 in large measure by this emergency mobilization of 300,000 people. That changed the dynamics, and now Russia sees, okay, now we're starting to succeed tactically, so we don't need nuclear weapons. But that can change, and according to their doctrine, and according to recent statements by Putin, by Ryabkov, by Lavrov, by several other generals, other people on their televisions, they're all singing the same song. If you change the dynamics on the battlefield and we start getting attacked by Western and NATO weapons on our territory, then we again could resort to nuclear weapons. Putin has never said anything besides, if our territorial integrity is threatened, we will use nuclear weapons. Folks, they're not bluffing. They weren't bluffing when they said they were going to go to war in 2022 if we continue to press NATO in there. Putin was open in saying that to Biden himself, to NATO Secretary General Stoltenberg himself. He directly told him. Stoltenberg even admitted it earlier this year. This is not anything I'm making up. This is on the record. Stoltenberg said it out loud. It's been on our channel before. So we know that when Putin says these kinds of things, he's not bluffing. So why then would we want to go into a situation to where on the ground tactically, this war cannot be won, and we want to press it into an area where we might put Russia in a position to do the one thing that we cannot survive, and that is a nuclear escalation. Think about that. For Ukraine to change the dynamics on the battle, for these actions, these tactical actions of firing weapons into Russia to have a positive impact, it's got to change the dynamics of the war in the fact that Ukraine will have to outdo their disadvantages, that Russia has the advantages in air power, air defense, armor, drones, glide bombs and missiles from the Russian side, industrial capacity, and manpower. Every single one of those would have to be reversed from their current advantage to the Russian side to even enable the possibility of a tactical success for the Ukraine side. All of these missile strikes into Russia, as I've just graphically shown you, won't change anything tactically. They won't address any of that list of things. But what they will do is they will significantly raise the risk and the possibility of going nuclear. Now, why in God's name would we want to even play with that? By all rights, the most logical, rational thing is to bring this war to a conclusion as soon as possible, to end the threat of nuclear escalation, to lock in with negotiations the current front line so that Russia doesn't take any more territory, not even any more of eastern Ukraine, much less anything beyond the Dnieper River or any threat whatsoever for the rest of the alliance. Now, there's been lots of comments and talk recently among the German leadership, a Norwegian general, several other people are fearing that Russia is going to attack within 3 to 5 years into NATO, which is an insane proposition. It's absurd at the surface, but there's lots of people afraid of that. If you're really afraid of that, then you need to get this war over right now. Right now. Let's end this war quickly so that Russia stops going forward. And then you can do whatever you want on your own national prospect your own military, to build up your defense, whatever you want to do. Every nation's free to do that. If that's your concern, then you should want this war over right now. The last thing anyone in NATO should want is to keep the war going on and keep the risk of escalation into nuclear weapons off the table. I mean, it's irrational, it's illogical, it's immoral. Any way you want to look at it, it's a stupid thing to do, and we need to stop right now. That's your deep dive for today. Tune in on Friday at 1:00. We have Ted Postal is going to be on. Is going to talk about specifically that issue I mentioned earlier about the attack on the Russian nuclear advanced radar warning system and why that's such a dangerous thing, and really even how that system works. It's absolutely fascinating what he's going to be showing to us, as all of those things are. Tune in 1:00 on Friday, but I'm sure we'll have some stuff for you tomorrow too. So tune in on that, and we look forward to seeing you on Daniel Davis Deep Dive then.